Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Crump, and today's date is April 18th, 2019. I am at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina, interviewing Sheryl Bell and her military experiences in the United States Air Force during Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go any further, could you please spell your full name?
Sure, it's Sheryl, S-H-E-R-Y-L, Denise, D-E-N-I-S-E, Bell, B-E-L-L.
Thank you. Would you tell me a little bit about your childhood, family, and where you grew up?
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, not too far from here. I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters. My father was in the military. He was in the United States Army. My mom was a homemaker for a very long time, and then eventually she became employed after she got her business degree. Graduated from high school there, college there, and then I joined the military.
Okay. What was it like where you grew up, rough or peaceful?
It was very rough. I grew up on the west side of Charlotte, so we had a very large impoverished area. The middle school, the elementary school was probably 90% free or reduced lunch. So it was very rough. So if you know anything about the west side of Charlotte, you would know, yeah.
Could you tell me about your father's beliefs about women in the military and how that influenced your decision to join the service?
He did not believe that the military was a place for women, I will tell you that. He was in Vietnam. He did serve in Vietnam 2 tours. He was shot 6 times while in Vietnam, so he thought that the military in general was a little bit too rough for women. The day that I told my dad that I joined the military, he asked me to go to the mailbox. He put the car in reverse and tried to hit me with the car because he figured if I had broken bones, I could not go. That's how strongly he felt about women not joining the military. What that did for me is made me more determined. So I told him, I said, well, not only will I join, but I will outrank you one day, which I have, and I will do more years than you did, which I did. So that's why I am where I am today.
What does he think about that now, since you've exited the service?
He laughs at me now. You know, he always said, you said you're going to do it, and I can't tell you anything, you're hard-headed, you know. But with the changing times and more exposure in the military and women in the military, I think he's better at accepting it. I don't think he still fully understands or wants women in the military, but he accepts it. Okay. So.
Would you talk about your experiences as a woman in the military and which is typically dominated by men?
I wouldn't use the word dominated. There are more men in the military than there are women, but because they're so specific as far as career fields are concerned, there are career fields that have more women in those career fields. So as an Air Force medic, my career field was primarily female. So my experience was, in my opinion, was no different than any other airman's experience. We have rules and regulations in place that make sure that there's fair treatment and no disparities. So I couldn't even speak to it, to be honest.
Okay. What do you remember about 9/11 and where were you and what were you doing? How did you react?
So we were training, I was at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. We were training the week before and we worked 14-hour shifts, no days off. So I finally got a day off, September 10th. All right, finally got a day off. I went home. I had 4 cell phones because I was constantly on call. Turned off all the cell phones and I went to sleep and I woke up on September the 11th. By the time I woke up, the reason I woke up is because I heard, go, 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 go. My apartment complex that I was living in was primarily security forces. And I just heard bags and duffel bags going over the banister. I was on the 2nd floor. They were throwing stuff from the 4th floor down. We have to go, we have to go, we have to go. So I look out the door and I was like, what's going on? They was like, turn on the TV. So I go in, I turn on the television, and that's when the second plane was going to the Twin Towers. So I turned on all my cell phones. I had about 78 missed calls combined from parents, from family members, from the base. And all I remember is getting my uniform on and heading towards the base. It took about 2.5 hours to get on the base. That's how backed up the traffic was because they shut everything from Virginia all the way up down.
Were you mad or angry about it, or?
You didn't even have time to think about it. Honestly, all you knew is that you need to respond. As a medic, the first thing that comes to our mind is how many lives do we need to save? How many people do we need to help? So having the opportunity to be upset or not upset was not an option for us. We just knew we needed to respond and help those who needed help.
What was the highest rank you held in the service?
E8 Senior Master Sergeant.
What is that exactly?
So for enlisted, on the enlisted side, you start from E1 all the way to E9. All right, so E9 is the highest, E1 is the lowest. It's basically what you come out of basic training as. So I'm one from the top. So I held the rank of E8, which is Senior Master Sergeant. And so I'm considered a senior NCO.
Was it hard, like, getting to that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Getting to E5 is hard. In order to make rank in the Air Force in most branches, you have to show a level of competency. So there are certain tests that you have to take. There are certain schools that you have to go to. And then you have to have a certain amount of time in the service and a certain amount of time in the current rank that you're wearing. You have to show certain leadership skills. You have to have evaluations that are far better than most, so on and so forth. So it was not an easy task, but well worth it.
Do you recall the day you entered the service, and what do you remember about that day?
I don't recall the day that I swore in, but I do remember my first day of basic training. And what I remember about it is that it was the 4th of July, and I was in San Antonio, Texas. And I stepped off the plane and lost about 3 pounds in sweat. And I couldn't even breathe. It was so hot. Being from the South, I thought I knew heat, but I knew humidity. And then getting to Texas and realizing what dry heat was a little shell shocking.
Would you tell me about your experience at boot camp?
Boot camp was not bad for me. You know, to be quite honest, our unit, the 321st, was actually nicknamed Disneyland. We actually went to baseball games. We had all-female flight. This was the first flight that they decided to integrate with the male flight. So we had a brother flight right next to us, but all of our training was male and female integrated. So this was back in 1997, and this is the first time that they decided to integrate male and females in training. 50 women, open bay, 6 showers, 2 bathrooms, and that was all she wrote. 6 weeks of it.
What other training and or schooling did you have while in the Air Force?
So, of course, we went to tech school, and in tech school, that's when you learn your technical skills. That's when you learn how to become a medic, everything you need to go out in the field. Then you go out and you do your clinicals. You go from hospital to hospital and get your clinicals done, and that's when you're actually interacting with patients, which are service members and their dependents. After that, you go to Airman Leadership School, and that's right before you become a supervisor. And then from Airman Leadership School, you go to Senior NCO, and there's another school in between there, NCO school in between that. I also had several other courses that I would take all day just to enhance your career and your chances of getting promoted, but were not required.
Where were you stationed, and what were your responsibilities prior to the conflict with Iraq and Afghanistan?
So I started off, of course, basic training was San Antonio, Texas. I went to tech school there too. I left there and I went to a guard unit in Charlotte. I did that for a couple of years, and then I went active duty. Then I went to Langley Air Force Base, left there, went to Charleston Air Force Base, left there, went to Sumter Shaw Air Force Base, left there and came back into the Guard, left there, went to Fort Dix in New Jersey, which is an Army base, and then from there I deployed and then came back. So my responsibilities prior to, I was in flight medicine, so we took care of our flyers, our pilots, navigators, those who had special requirements for medical needs. We took care of those guys.
How far were like the bases apart from each other?
They were all on the East Coast, but you're talking about states apart. So South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey.
How did moral chants immediately following the attacks of 9/11 and the lead up to shock and awe in Iraq?
Right. So how did my morals change? Again, they really didn't. September 11th was an event that shocked and awed the entire world. Again, we were trained to help those who needed help. We didn't have the opportunity to make a decision as to how we felt about it. We we couldn't. You know, the only thing we need to worry about is getting to New Jersey, which we did deploy to New Jersey to help those that were hurt. When I went to Iraq, again, it changed nothing. I worked with nationals there, Iraqi nationals, and they were some of the most pleasant, calm people I've ever met. You don't, in my opinion, and for me personally, you don't have the opportunity to make judgments when you have a job to do, and especially if that job is saving lives.
Prior to your deployment, what had you heard about the conditions on the ground in Iraq?
I heard they were very volatile. I heard that you had to watch your back every step that you took. I heard that you could trust no one. I heard that there were mortar attacks, strike attacks. I heard that convoys were being attacked weekly and daily. I heard that we were not liked. I heard that you have to watch out for the local wildlife, all kinds of things, as you can imagine.
Were you scared when you got to Iraq?
I was not. I wasn't scared. Where I went in Iraq, I was at Saddam's old airport. We had warning systems. I knew that I served in a great branch, and we have a great military, so I was fully confident that they would not send their people over to an area that was dangerous in a sense without being prepared, whether it be training or warning systems or whatever. I felt that the training that I received prior to, which was almost 6 months, that I was well prepared to go into country and defend myself if I had to.
Prior to leaving for deployment, did you feel mentally and physically ready?
I did. I do have a son, and I am a single parent. So at the time, he was only 7 years old. So that was a task, but I got the opportunity to see him before I left. So they actually released me from training about 4 days early so that I could fly home, see him for Christmas, and then I left in January. So in regards to mental preparedness, when it came to my job, absolutely.
What do you remember about your flight to Kuwait?
I took Benadryl, so I remember absolutely nothing. I remember it was on a commercial flight and we had comfortable seats. That's about all I remember. The plane was full of military personnel. It was one plane dedicated to just military, and that's about all I remember.
Could you talk about your duties and responsibilities while you were deployed in Iraq?
I was a senior NCO again by that time, so it was really supervisory responsibilities. So basically, we had convoys, we had soldiers who were ready to come home, who had been there for over a year. President Obama had ordered the drawdown, so we had a certain amount of time to get everybody and everything out. So basically what we did, we went over and we relieved them and said, hey guys, leave all of your stuff with us, regardless of what it is, all of your equipment, everything, we'll take it from you, you go home. So that included weapons, it included vehicles, it included any and everything. Now that wasn't my initial job when I got there, but because I deployed with the Army, they put you where they need you, and that's where they needed people the most.
On your background information survey, you described life in your unit as unpredictable. Mm-hmm. Could you explain what you meant by this?
So you never knew what was going to happen from day to day. You never knew. You always had a plan, and things never went as planned. Okay, you're going to get a convoy, you're going to get this amount of troops in at this time. It never happens like that. So unpredictable meaning that you just went with the flow. You had to be very flexible. I could go home at 2 a.m. and get a call at 2:10 and say, hey, we need you back. So we worked every day, anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, no days off the entire time I was there.
Could you give an example of like one of the events that kind of just didn't go as planned? Or
the first day, probably the second day I was there, we were expecting Air Force to come in with us. So there were only 7 Air Force members there out of all the Army. And they said, well, you guys are going to get another Air Force unit. They're going to come in, they're going to assist you. Well, what we got was about 60 kids straight out of tech school. So my oldest troop at the time was maybe 19. The first day there was an altercation, and one of the troops decided they wanted to shoot the other troop. So pulled a weapon, pointed at M16, right at the person's head. And so we had to handle that from day one. So there were a lot of internal issues that we had to iron out first before we moved on to the actual mission. And that kind of threw things off, as far as getting that taken care of first.
Could you talk about your state of mind, knowing that anyone at any time could be the enemy?
Very vigilant. Very vigilant. I wouldn't say fearful, but you were trained to look for certain clues or certain things, or, if you threw something out that was electronic and it was gone the next day, then you're looking, to see if there's an improvised bomb somewhere or something to that nature. But vigilance is probably the best way to describe your mindset.
Did you ever have any interactions with the civilians of Iraq? If so, could you describe these interactions?
Well, we worked with Iraqi forces, and they were called USETI. So we worked with those individuals daily, and they were very pleasant, very pleasant. They had no sense of time. So if you say be here at 7, they normally got there around 10 or 11 because that's their culture. So it took some getting used to their culture, but as far as individuals, very, very peaceful people.
Did you ever lose any of those electronics you were talking about?
Lose them? No. We did have a couple of weapons come up missing, but we were able to recover before we left the deployment.
Could you tell me about the time you had to egress from a moving vehicle?
So by the time we were getting ready to leave, after we'd been over there for a while, they started to break the base down. And one of the things that they broke down was the warning system. And the warning system tells us when an incoming missile is coming, or any type of incoming is coming, is heading our way, and we did not have that system. They had already broken it down. So all we heard was the whistle, and we saw the light, and we were driving to the compound, and so we just heard egress, egress, egress. So we tried to stop the vehicle, but we're on gravel, so the vehicle didn't quite stop. So the vehicle is still going. We're jumping out of the vehicle. We're going the opposite direction of the vehicle. So it was like 6 of us, and we're on top of each other trying to egress from the vehicle, and then we had to run, I want to say it's probably a quarter of a mile to the nearest shelter. So now that was probably the only time that I probably had that, okay, listen, if I don't save my life, we're in trouble. So that was probably the only time I thought about this may be it. So
Did any of your other service members that were with you get injured?
They did not. Okay. Thank goodness.
Could you talk about your roles and responsibilities on the Honor Guard? Did this leave a lasting impression on you?
Absolutely, it did. So my responsibilities were, I was on the firing party, so whenever we had to do the 21 rifle salute, I would normally command or either fire. We did multiple funerals. And it was something that we did in honor until we had a plane crash and we lost 7 of our good friends. And these are people that I knew personally. And to carry their bodies and their caskets off of the plane when they were flown back in did, in fact, leave a lasting impression of how you can talk to one person the day before and the next day they're gone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Those members that you held funerals for, did you have a lot of interactions with their families? And
we did. We do a sponsorship for their families. We were able to get their houses paid off for them. We were able to get their cars paid off. We started college funds for their children. But to this day, our unit still reaches out to their family, and this happened maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But they still reach out to the family and make sure there's nothing that they need. The military, when I say we, are very family oriented. So we don't only take care of our service members, but the families as well.
What did you believe was the most important thing you did during your deployment in Iraq?
Just take care of my people, I think. It's so easy for some of the young troops to come back with PTSD, or come back with issues. This is their first time away from home for a lot of them, other than basic training. So I think taking care of them was probably the most important thing, because what happens in Iraq is going to continue to happen whether we're there or not. But sending them back home safely and alive is what mattered.
when you were working with these young service members, how were they did it change them a lot from the time they got there to like the time they left?
A lot of them left a lot more mature than what they were when they got there. Again, it was a new experience for them, so I know they learned a lot. Whether it changed them personally, I would just think maybe maturity-wise, they may have changed a little bit. You had some that would come back and some that didn't, so for a lot it was just an experience.
What was it like to be attached to the Army for your deployment? How were you treated by the Army?
Oh, it was totally different from Air Force, I would tell you that. There was definitely a separation between Air Force and Army. Excuse me. We were treated as if, we have a nickname they call us a cheer force because they think that we're lazy because we're so technical. But when it came down to getting a job done, working together with the Army, I appreciate them more than what I did before I went. But they really we all looked out for each other, but we had our internal jokes and things going on. Excuse me.
Did you experience culture shock in Iraq?
No, not really. We were pretty much secluded in the mountains, so we interacted with those. I'm sorry. We interacted with those on the base, primarily, and not the locals, per se. But not really. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Other than your deployment in Iraq, what other experiences were you proud of?
I'm proud of all of my experiences in the military. My honor guard service, my training. I went to things like this, doing interviews and talking to students, recruiting events, things of that nature. So just about everything that I've ever done in uniform or related to the uniform, I'm very proud of.
Were your mother and father proud of you and what you did while you were in the service?
Absolutely, until I started to outrank my dad.
Could you describe what it takes to be a senior master sergeant?
A lot of hard work, a lot of determination. Being ready for the opportunity before the opportunity presents itself. Getting ready when it's time to get ready versus being ready, you may miss your opportunity. When opportunity comes, you have to be ready for it.
Just a follow-up question. As you were headed up towards senior master sergeant, did you outrank a lot of other women that you were working around?
Absolutely. For senior master sergeant at the time, there were only 3 other female senior master sergeants on the base, and I was the only African American on the base that was a senior. So most of the other seniors were males. I'm sorry.
How did they feel about having you and those 2 other women as senior master sergeants?
I didn't receive any negative feedback. It was actually more of, it was welcomed because the disparity between female and male senior master sergeants was obvious. So it was actually welcomed when I made senior. I was actually congratulated by quite a few male seniors.
What was the most challenging thing you experienced during your time in the service?
I would probably think traveling away from my son was probably the most challenging. There wasn't a task that I was presented with that I felt was too challenging. I'm always up for a challenge, so that wasn't it. It was more personal.
What was the hardest challenge that you faced while you were in the service?
The hardest? I guess when I was honor guard for the members that we lost that I knew personally, it would probably be the hardest.
Okay. Why did you choose, after you left the service, to be a teacher and work with high school students?
So, funny story is that I always wanted to be a JROTC teacher or instructor, and when I was in JROTC in high school, I asked my JROTC instructor, so how do I do what you do? And he told me, oh, well, you just have to join the military, retire from it, and then become a JROTC instructor. So it's not something that I chose to do after. I actually chose the military to get to where I want to be, and this is where I want to be.
Do you travel to like different high schools?
I do a lot of middle schools, a lot of elementary schools, and most high schools have JROTC programs of their respective branches. So we normally travel to a lot of middle schools and elementary schools to do talks.
In your opinion, what does it mean to serve honorably?
Just exalt the core values. Every branch of service has a set of core values. Ours is integrity, service before self, and excellence in all you do. So as long as you're doing that, in my opinion, to the best of your ability, you're serving honorably.
What advice would you give to anyone wanting to join the service?
I would tell anybody to think past lunch. Okay, a lot of people want to join the military because they want to help people, they want to be patriotic, and those are all good reasons. But let's think beyond that. Let's think, what are you going to do with your training? What are you going to do once you get out? What are you going to do if you decide not to retire, or if you decide to retire? What can you do for you, your country, your family, your community? Just don't think about me, this is what I want to do. Think about everything and every aspect and how you can serve.
How old is your son now?
He's 14.
Has he ever thought about going into the service?
Well, his dad is retired military and his mom's retired military, so I think he's probably tired of military. He hasn't mentioned it. He actually wants to go to Clemson and major in communication.
Do you have any other stories, experience, thoughts, or would you like to share that you would like to share before we conclude this interview?
None that come to mind. You know, I would say that it's a very rewarding career, and I encourage anyone who's even thought about it to do it. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, I thought about it and I wish I had, or if I could do it now, or so on and so forth. If you thought about it and you want to do it, or if you should check into it, go for it. I recommend it for everybody, honestly.
How old were you when you left the military?
I was 40.
Do you want me to conclude it now? Thank you for joining us today at Grandview Middle School, and thank you for your dedication and service to our country.
Thank you.